Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 166 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin.
Hello.
And Gavin, did you have to work this summer?
I sure did. Well, I mean, yes and no. I had a child, so but I don't normally have summer off. Well, thank you.
Yes, little baby Igneous. How's baby Igneous doing?
She's doing great. That's not her name, but for the sake of the podcast, I'm down for it.
I genuinely do not remember your child's name, and that's okay. Baby Igneous is what we're going with.
Heck yeah, I'll take it.
I feel like I could guess Emma, and I feel like every other baby's name is Emma nowadays.
Nah, it's not it.
All right, we're going with baby Igneous in that case.
I like it.
But back to you working over the summer.
Yeah.
So we're recording, for the record, Gavin, just this absolute corporatist scum.
That is correct.
Decides to schedule this recording, number one, on my last day of freedom as a teacher, number two, on Labor Day.
That is correct.
And
so this is going to really rip my kind of lefty credentials away from me. I went into work today when I didn't have to.
Oh my God.
I know, but yeah. There are only so many hours in the rest of the week, and I have stuff that I need to do. So, and two separate people because my university is weird in that staff have Labor Day off, but classes still happen. If that wasn't the case, I wouldn't have gone in.
That kind of begs the question.
So like the faculty don't have the day off. Staff do.
And there's a difference between faculty and staff?
There is.
This country's so screwed up, man. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean.
Well, you're a teacher. There's lots of people who work at the school who are not teachers.
Okay. I'm picking up what you're putting down. This would be like if the cafeteria workers didn't show up, but I still had to teach a class.
Yeah, or like if there's a student in your class who has like accessibility requirements that has an aide where, they wouldn't come in, but the teacher still would. So again, not quite the perfect comparison there since that's not as much of a thing in college, but...
Understand the point.
But yes, anyway, I had two separate faculty members specifically say the phrase, laboring on Labor Day, huh? And each time it killed me.
Just
a little bit.
Look, we're getting almost far afield from my original point that I wanted to make, which was anyway, now that this is my last day of summer vacation, I just want to say, if you're a grown adult and you're working in the summer, what kind of a dick are you? That's my one swear word for the episode.
Become a teacher. We need more of them.
Yes. And for the record, if you are a teacher and you're one of those teachers that gets all whiny whenever someone brings up the fact you have summers off, don't. You can just say, it's awesome. You don't have to be like, oh, we work really hard during the school year if you had to deal with this many kids. No, that might be true. But you can just say, no, it's incredibly awesome that for 2 months in the summer, I can just, go play in the freeway if I wanted to. And no one is wondering where I am. It's incredible. Anyways, it's Labor Day. It's my last day of summer vacation. I'm fostering a dog who's wondering why he's been put into the crate for the first time in a while.
Poor buddy.
Let's get on with the episode. I haven't recorded one of these in a while. What's going on?
Absolutely. So first, we have some housekeeping. And while I'm reading that, Mike, you're going to look up a Today in History.
Oh, I already got Today in History.
Perfect. So we'll do that, then we'll do Today in History, and then we'll get right into it. There may or may not be a little segment that I'll record in post about some various goings-on in the administration about science things, but I'll do that in post, so look forward to that. But anywho, don't forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to give us feedback about the show and to suggest any future topics you'd like to hear about here, for give or take an hour. Mike and I to talk about. And Fia, when she's able to come. She's doing grad school things this week, by the way. So she's still on the show. She's just in grad school. So if you'd like to be a guest on the show, make sure to fill out our guest form down in the show notes. And as for next episode, this episode got me thinking about a specific group of mammals that are real weird, called the monotremes. These are the 5 living species of mammals today that lay eggs. That is the 4 species of echidna and the 1 species of platypus. So we'll be talking about them in next episode.
Lay eggs. Okay. All right.
Absolutely. So yeah, that is the housekeeping. We'll do Today in History, and then I'll make a little post-editing cut. So Mike, what happened today, September 3rd, in history?
So, Gavin, you're familiar with like England, right?
Sure. As a
Great
concept, yeah.
Britain. Yeah. UK. I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about at this time, but like, the general Englandish area.
Okay, the British Isles.
Yeah, who's in charge of them?
Generally England, much to the others' chagrin.
What do we call the position of the person who's in charge of them?
The king and or queen.
The king and or queen, usually.
Usually.
Do you know about the exception to the king and or queen over the last like I don't know, like thousand-ish years? It's
I
been
do
king
I
or
do not.
queen. So there was this guy named Oliver Cromwell
Okay.
who just kind of showed up one day. I don't think we know a whole hell of a lot about his
That is
backstory.
by the way the most aggressively British name I've ever heard.
Oh, it's fantastic. He showed up. I think he like cut the king's head off or something. He goes,
Cool.
"Not the king anymore. We're not doing kings. I'm the Lord Protector."
Okay. All right.
That was that was the name. Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector. He ruled. The thing was, he wasn't a king, but he ruled until his death. And then on September 3rd, 1658,
Okay.
his son then became Lord Protector. His son, Richard Cromwell, or the reason that I am picking this particular item,
Okay.
nicknamed Tumbledown Dick.
Okay.
You don't get to make that up. Like,
You
that's
don't.
incredible. Big fan of that. He ruled for like 6 months or something. Like, it was not a very long time. And then all of a sudden, the kings and queens were like, actually, like, now that dad's gone, we're going to do the king and queen thing again. But yeah, on this day in 1658, Tumbledown Dick was the Lord Protector.
Fascinating. We love toppling monarchs here on this podcast.
Even if temporarily, only to set up another monarchy.
Yeah. It
All right,
reminds
Gavin,
me of
let's roll.
there's a I don't think he was at the beginning, but he I believe now is a dictator of a country in Africa who has like some very long name or like very long title after his name.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it's the president of Uganda. Um, that they may or may not be correct, but look it up, listeners. He has some like spectacular, like if you read it, you're like, oh, this person definitely just wants titles after their name
Mm-hmm.
because they're a dictator. So it's like comically run-on sentence full of titles that he gave himself. All right, we're on to the not so fun part of the podcast where I get to tell you about all of the pretty terrible things that the federal administration running the government here in the United States has been doing regarding science that are not great. So, and if this is something you're not interested in listening to, I totally understand. There's a timestamp down in the show notes for when the episode picks back up with like normal, episode conversation. In recent days, or probably about a week at this point, you've probably heard about some of the just a lot of chaos and things going on at the CDC. Long story short, the FDA has a panel that sort of decides and like recommends different things about vaccines. So, for example, the COVID vaccine is sort of the one that's sort of the center. But the FDA has a panel that basically recommends who should get this vaccine, and that basically determines who insurance will pay for. This advisory panel then sends their recommendation to the head of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and the director of the CDC has to sign off on it, and then that recommendation gets sent out and is like the official recommendation of the government. Throughout, this president's term, this administration so far, that board of advisors on the FDA has been replaced with a lot of people who, at least regarding the COVID vaccine, are very skeptical about it, which there's really no scientific basis for, truly. and they changed the recommendation from everybody 6 months and older should get this vaccine to their recommendation of only people 65 and older, or younger people if they have underlying health conditions that put them at risk for severe illness. So basically changing it from you can go to your pharmacy and get it like a flu shot, your insurance covers it, to only elderly folks or sick folks, basically. There's absolutely no basis for this. In fact, COVID cases are starting to tick up quite a bit. And so basically that FDA panel, put that out, and the CDC director would have had to sign off on it. The CDC director, Susan Menares, who has only been in the job for a little over a month. She was confirmed, nominated and confirmed by the Senate in late July. So she is not some long-standing person who's been there for a long time. She's somebody who was put up for nomination for this job by this administration. Basically said, I'm not going to sign off on that because there's absolutely no scientific basis for it, and we're a science organization. And so, even though she'd only been in the job for less than a month, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., basically just announced that she had been fired, even though it doesn't really seem like he has the authority to do that. She's a presidential nominee. She needs to be fired by the president. And she basically said, you can't fire me. You don't have that authority. And because of all of this, several high-ranking, basically the people directly below her, the various second-in-commands of various parts of the CDC resigned basically in protest, basically saying politics is getting in the way of science here, and it's going to get people hurt, and I can't be a part of that. These are people, let's see, I'll just read some of their titles. Chief Medical Officer, Deputy Director for Program and Science, Director of the National Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases. Those are sort of viruses that come to humans from animals. Director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases. So, these are very high-ranking people who have been in the government for quite a while, or at the very least in public health for a very long time. And so that was all sort of at the start of the weekend. And then just in the last couple of days, several former directors of the CDC, 9 of them, I think, from across various administrations, basically penned an open letter, an op-ed, basically saying, this is terrible. People are going to die because of this, and our health system is going to be way worse off for this. So, again, the science is saying things that the administration folks don't like, and the scientists, even the ones that they put up, that they put in these jobs, the recommendations they're making are so anti-science and so just not based in anything that even the people that they are putting in these positions say, this is too much, there's no evidence for this, this is going to get people hurt, and I quit. Or in the case of this CDC director, I'm not going to leave unless you make me. And this is just sort of one, example with the change in the COVID vaccine recommendations. The CDC in general has had a number of, rounds of mass layoffs and firings. Back in June, Robert F. Kennedy removed every member of the CDC's vaccine advisory panel, so it's a separate panel or committee than the one at the FDA. They also make recommendations and research things about vaccines, and he just got rid of all of them. People who have been in public health for decades. So yeah. Some really not fun things going on around our public health system. And regardless, these things should really make you question a lot of things that this government is saying or is going to say about public health data, because anybody who could have been perceived as nonpartisan is basically gone. And so the only people there are people that are put in by this government And this government really does not seem to be fond of putting in people who are going to disagree with the people in charge, which is something that you need people to do. So, yeah. Anyway, get your COVID vaccines before they change the recommendation while your insurance still covers it. Anywho, back to the episode. Moving on. Today, we are talking about Viviparity, or in, actual common English, the Queen's English, calling back to Today in History. That means animals that give live birth. Animals that don't lay eggs. And so,
animals that give live birth, animals that do not lay eggs. I thought this was like the platypus and like 2 other animals that didn't count.
no, that is next episode.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So next episode. So doing this episode got me thinking about that group of mammals. That's going to be next episode. But this is about the ones that actually do give live birth.
Okay.
And so, Mike, what in your mind are like the defining features of mammals?
The defining features of mammals. So, hairy bodies,
Okay.
broadly speaking. Sexual reproduction.
Okay. That's very like the hair.
Too broad.
The hair. Yeah, that's very broad. The hair narrows it down quite a lot. Sexual reproduction is
Does not.
a lot of things.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think
Yeah.
of things that go sort of go along with that. Warm-blooded
Okay.
would be another one.
Sure.
I'm assuming something about like how we feed our young. Like in humans, we would call that breastfeeding.
Milk.
But like I don't know, nipples broadly.
Right.
Being a mammal thing.
Specifically, what comes out of nipples, which is milk. That's only a mammal thing.
I'm trying to think. I don't know exactly what else.
You hit the main ones.
Yeah, I feel like I remember looking this up or being told as a child this, and like it is a surprisingly short list of what makes a mammal.
I mean, there are a lot of things like skeletally about us as well. You know, like we don't have ribs on all of our vertebrae. For example, in lizards, basically all of their vertebrae that aren't in the neck, or well, I guess even sometimes in the neck, but in the tail, anything that's between the head and the hips, all those vertebrae have ribs. A lot of different parts of the skull. Mammals have a lot fewer bones in the skull than lizards do. Stuff like that. But like on a surface level, like what the average person would have learned in like high school and even like middle school biology classes, pretty much some combination of hair, milk, warm blood, and live birth.
I feel like just to include that, like most people in like their young biology classes probably learned or did you say live birth?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's I was trying to step on your point that you had already made, so my apologies.
Oh, good. But yeah, the only like truly like pretty definitional of mammals of those is hair and milk. You know, some of the things that like mammals came from may or may not have had milk. They probably had hair. But of the things alive today, if it has either hair or milk, it is a mammal. Broadly. But warm blood, as we've talked about on the show before, it's like birds are warm-blooded. It's also not like a dichotomy of warm or cold. There's a lot of in-between. And live birth, you know, when you think of lizards and reptiles and things, you think eggs. And generally, that is true. But as we'll talk about, that is by no means like a blanket statement. And so going back to mammals for just a second, with very rare exceptions, that's true. Out of the roughly 6,600 species of mammals alive today, all but 5 give live birth. The only ones...
All but 5 give live birth. Okay.
Yes, the only ones that don't give live birth are that weirdo group, the monotremes, so that is the platypus, and the echidnas. There are 4 species of echidnas. They lay eggs. And so, what exactly do I mean when I say live birth?
What do you mean by? I mean, are you asking me, or are you going to
I mean,
tell me?
if you want to take a stab, go for it.
I feel like that's like kid comes out not in egg. Like
I mean, pretty much.
I'm almost like defining this as the absence of, instead of defining live birth as something, it is the absence of any protective shell.
Yes, that is a good definition for like the everyday person.
Okay.
And so basically, the embryo develops inside the mother with generally the mother's circulatory system providing nutrients for them. When the baby is born, they are metabolically independent from the mother. You know, when they come out, they are doing their own thing. With mammals, that kind of gets a little tricky because I think basically all mammals are reliant on the mother for milk straight out the gate. How long that's the case for varies a lot from species to species. But in a lot of the other non-mammal things, for the most part, after the baby's born, regardless of if they're hatched or live birth, they generally don't need the parents for much of anything. Birds
Mm-hmm.
also kind of break this. Birds do a lot of very strange things. Mostly because they fly. But anyway, we'll talk about
Of
birds
course.
in just a second too. But there are lots of other ways for embryos to develop, of course. The other two, so there's sort of generally three different styles of being born. First, live birth.
Wait, there's three. You said three styles of being born?
Of like starting.
Okay.
So the first one
I'm listening.
we just talked about being born like humans, like we think about it, where
Sure.
pregnant for a while, baby comes out. The second one is the other one you're probably thinking of, which is called oviparity, meaning the classic sort of laying eggs. That is birds, turtles, platypus and echidnas, many fish and amphibians with their like jelly eggs as well.
Mm-hmm.
Basically all invertebrates. There are exceptions and we'll talk about them. But this is like what you think of with eggs. Fertilization, happens either internally or externally. And then the embryos develop outside the mother. Out in the world.
Embryos develop. Okay.
And then there's sort of a combination of live birth and eggs called ovoviviparity.
That's not real.
It sure is. Basically, fertilization happens internally, and the egg is formed inside the mother just like it is in egg-laying animals.
Mm-hmm.
But then the mother just doesn't lay the egg. Typically, there's no placenta or anything connecting the eggs to the mother directly. Mostly, the eggs just live off the yolk like they would if they had been laid out in the world. But the mother just, obviously the mother does some important things for the eggs, like gas exchange, because if they're inside the mother still, they're not exposed to oxygen. They wouldn't be able to like breathe like they would need to. So the mother's, metabolism does that for them. But in the case of like non-amniotic eggs, like jelly eggs of like frogs and fish, the mother also provides water, obviously, to keep them from drying out. And the egg just develops inside the mother for most or all of its development. And then hatches either, inside the mother before they're born, or like immediately after, within like seconds of like the egg being laid.
Okay.
So the mom just holds onto them for various reasons. We'll talk about the different reasons why some of these situations are better than others.
I was gonna say, what's the like? Yeah, I was gonna ask like, what are the both advantages and just like differences between that and just like a regular egg birth? But I guess if you're gonna get to that,
Yeah,
then
that'll
I'll
be
hold
what
off.
sort of closes us off.
Okay.
And so there are some frogs that do this, where this is like a good way to sort of visualize it. So you think of frog eggs, they're just like the little balls of jelly, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, the mother would hang on to them and then just give birth to tadpoles, basically. In some species, again, this depends wildly on exactly what group of animals we're talking about, but in some species, the embryos run out of yolk early because, you know, for example, in a lot of the reptiles, they'll still have like the eggs and stuff. It might not be like as shelled as it would be for like the ones that lay eggs, but they still have a yolk inside. Like I said, they don't have like a placenta, so they're not like hooked in.
Mm-hmm.
And so they still have the yolk that they feed on. But sometimes the yolk will run out early. Again, that depends species to species. And in those cases, the mother does provide some nutrition. Some species produce like unfertilized eggs that the embryos will eat in the womb. So the mother will basically just, you know, egg drop, you know, from the ovaries, and the babies will eat that as they're growing. Some have specific secretions in the uterus, sort of like if like the human womb made milk that the embryo drinks instead of being like connected via like a placenta. Or in some cases, there is like a literal placenta. And so
in the egg?
No. So in some cases, they start off as like, you know, a fertilized egg. So imagine a frog again.
Yeah.
So we have the jelly egg. Inside its like outer layer, there's a little tadpole growing.
Yeah.
Eventually, again, depending on the species, that will hatch and will come out of the little jelly ball.
Mm-hmm.
And then will like attach to the side of the mother frog's uterus and make a placenta. That is the vast minority, but it does happen in some species.
That seems wildly inefficient.
You'd be surprised. It depends.
Okay.
It also depends evolutionarily how they kind of got there. Because if, you know, evolution is really good at working with what it has, but it's not great at once you've sort of gone down a track, in some cases, it can be hard to sort of go back down it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's the particular case here, but and so when it comes to the placenta, mammals are the group most closely associated with that organ. You know, for example, the largest group of mammals today are called placentalia, the placental mammals. But the organ has evolved a number of times and is present in several groups of fish, even a few reptiles. And in those cases, the only real difference between like the mammalian placenta and what you know, these fish and reptiles are doing is that the embryos like never develop like an outer layer before they're implanted on the side of the womb. If that makes sense. It's kind of
I can picture it, but like that's, I don't know.
We'll go through like very briefly how it works in mammals and then sort of use that as a comparison for others.
All right.
And so those are like broadly the three different ways that animals come into being. They are born live, like humans. They are, you know, laid as eggs, as in like a turtle or a bird. Or they're an egg to start with inside the mother. The egg hatches in the mother and is born live. And
yes,
even though I say that is the three ways, it is like a spectrum, as everything is in biology. It's just easier to talk about if we have boxes to put it in.
Sure.
And so there are some really interesting ways that this kind of happens. Some people sort of lump viviparity, so the live birth, and the ovoviviparity, the egg hatching inside the mother still. Some people sort of lump them together. And so just for ease of conversation for the rest of this episode, that's kind of what I'm going to do. So when I say live birth, just baby comes out alive, no egg. When I say laying eggs, I'm talking about like what birds do. Cool?
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about how mammals do it, and then we'll sort of compare that to everybody else. Developmental biology as a field is incredibly complicated. I never took a class in it on purpose. Mostly because embryos generally do not tend to make good fossils, surprisingly enough. Although it does happen under the right circumstances. And so, unfortunately, almost all embryonic fossils that we have are from eggs. Externally laid eggs, not inside the mother. There are some examples, but not many, of, like, pregnant fossils. They do exist, but there's not that many of them.
I was going to say, that seems like something that wouldn't fossilize super well.
No, for the most part, it's... there's a couple of, like, good mammal fossils, but the famous ones that I'm aware of are from marine reptiles.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically ichthyosaurs. Like, there are a number of ichthyosaur fossils that look like the mother died, like, during birth.
Uh-huh.
And there's several of those.
Okay.
So anyway, mammals. Our whole deal is that with the exception of those 5 monotreme species, we have placentas that nourish our embryos in the uterus. And apparently, I learned this while doing some the research for this episode. Apparently, either placenta or placentae is the correct plural for placenta.
No.
Well, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's a scientific term. Those are generally Greek and or Latin. Placentas is not the plural of a Greek or Latin word. So in my mind, I would be like, oh, the plural is definitely placentae.
I don't know, Gavin. It sounds pretty woke right now. Placenta. I'm going to say placentas.
Sure. Apparently, either are correct, even though I think that shouldn't be the case. Whatever. Anyway, even the so-called non-placental mammals, the marsupials, do develop a placenta for their embryos. It just lasts a much shorter time. So, for example, the embryo of the largest living marsupial, the red kangaroo, that's the one from Kangaroo Jack, if you are vaguely my age, despite being, like, pretty much person-sized, the embryo only stays in the uterus for about 33 days. Just barely over a month.
Yeah, that...
And
I mean, I'm always biasing this towards humans. I'm aware humans are reasonably slow to develop. At least that's my understanding. But, like, that's... Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so, during that time, they do have a placenta. It doesn't last very long because that 33 days is from when the egg is fertilized.
Mm-hmm.
Not when the placenta forms on the side of the uterus. So the placenta is there for even shorter. And so after those 33 days, the fetus is born, although it's not nearly as, like, messy as, like, a placental mammal birth, because it's not nearly as big, right? And so the baby basically crawls up, like, the front of the mom into the pouch, and the marsupials specifically develop kind of backwards. Like, for example, humans, our legs grow larger before our arms.
Okay.
In marsupials, that can't be the case because they have to climb up the fur of the mother to get into the pouch. So they have, like, comparatively huge arms. And so they crawl up into the pouch, and then they latch onto one of the mother's nipples for about 6 months. And
just straight?
Yeah. Then around 6 months post-birth, that's when the joey, which is what you call, like, baby marsupials, that's when they start to leave the pouch every now and then, but they still stay there for, a few more months. Just sort of coming in and out, mostly still eating the milk. But for 6 months, it's basically just like, oh, I'm pregnant. It's just not in the womb anymore. It's in the pouch. So they do still have the placenta while it's in the uterus. It just is only there for like a week. In the largest ones. In some of the smaller ones, I'm sure it's shorter.
Okay.
Back to normal mammals. So in general, when a mammalian egg is fertilized, it is still in the fallopian tubes. That's like the tube that connects the ovaries to the uterus. By the time the now fertilized embryo gets into the actual uterus, it's, divided a few times, and depending on the species, anywhere between 8 and 64 cells total, give or take. In humans, implantation, so that's when that ball of cells hits the side of the uterus and, connects to it to form the placenta. That happens at about 4 weeks. And
okay.
At this point, the embryo is basically more or less hollow, kind of like a tennis ball, with one area on the inside that has like an extra clump of cells on like one part of the inside of the ball. The cells that make up the like actual ball part are what become the placenta, and the inner or the outermost layer of the embryo's sort of birth sac called the chorion.
Can you say birth sac again?
Birth sac.
You're welcome, listeners.
Yes. The cells on the inside, that sort of smaller clump, that is what eventually ends up becoming everything else. So like step 1 of mammalian embryonic development is to form this ball that most of which will become the placenta and the supporting stuff to get the rest of the growth going. And so in humans, the embryo is fully hooked up and getting all or most of its nutrients from the mother by 14 weeks. Up until that point, the yolk has been doing most of the nourishment.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does the placenta work? What exactly does it do? Basically, it's just full of lots of blood vessels that are really, really small and get really, really close to the mother's blood vessels in the uterus. And because the vessels are so small and so close together, they can pass molecules across their walls like sugars and gases. This is how
That's kind of nuts.
Yeah, this is how the embryo gets oxygen, gets rid of carbon dioxide, gets food to grow, gets rid of their other waste like urea that, normal, not fetal animals get rid of through like peeing. And so think of the placenta sort of like the roots of a plant. The roots don't like take in the dirt around them. If you cut open a tree root, you won't find dirt on the inside. They're just surrounded by nutrients that they absorb. And so the spot on the uterus that the placenta anchors to changes to basically provide as much blood flow and surface area as possible for the metaphorical roots of the embryo to absorb the nutrients that the mother is providing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to sort of point out that if everything goes well during a pregnancy, at no point does the blood of the mother mix with the blood of the embryo. That's why mothers who have, diseases like HIV or AIDS or other like permanent blood transmitted diseases can give birth to babies without the disease.
Okay.
Things can obviously go wrong during pregnancy.
I was going to say that can't be all the time.
Right. But doctors these days are generally pretty good at preventing this. Like, if you have never been to the doctor before and you don't know that you have HIV or some other, blood transmitted disease, then yeah, there's a decent chance that it'll happen. But like, if you've been good about, having it on any chart ever, then the doctors generally do a good job at that.
Okay.
But there are a handful of viruses that can go across the placenta into the embryo, though, such as the Zika virus that, got into the southern United States a few years ago and caused like a big thing on social media I remember seeing, because that actively causes like developmental disorders, as well as rubella, which is the R in the MMR vaccine. That can go into the baby during development. And so these very often impact the development depending on exactly when in development the infection happens, and also how severe the mother's infection is. Obviously, the earlier the infection happens, the more time there is for the virus to do the damage. So it's not foolproof, but the placenta generally is very good at getting the embryo the good stuff it needs and keeping out the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so the exact length of the pregnancy depends on the species, but after a certain amount of time, the embryo / fetus / baby, whatever you want to call it, is born. That is very generally how mammals do it. And from what we can tell, mammals have been doing it this way for a long time. Obviously, as I mentioned, embryos and even, fresh babies do not preserve very well in the fossil record. Especially sort of the lack of eggs, even if we did have the very young, members of a species preserved as fossils.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't lay eggs, that's something that's very hard to show up in the fossil record because it's hard to prove a negative, And so the most recent common ancestor of all the mammals besides those 5 weird egg layers was somewhere in the late Jurassic, early Cretaceous, ballpark 120 million years ago at least. And there's been some suggestions that the ancestors to mammals, the synapsids, could have been giving birth, live birth, as early as the late Permian, so about 240 million years ago. In my mind, and this is something I kind of dove into a little bit because some of my undergraduate research was about these sort of proto-mammals, the things that mammals came from. An earlier evolution of live birth kind of makes sense to me. This is now my opinion. This is not, like, research. Just because, for reasons that we'll talk about in a second, it probably didn't happen just once in, like, the mammal lineage.
Mm-hmm.
So because we are mammals and it is what we do, we kind of just inherently think that that's the best way to do it. That live birth this way is, like, optimal.
Mm-hmm.
When it's not. It depends a lot on your situation. And as we'll see, there are a lot of different groups that kind of go back and forth, even with very closely related species. And so giving live birth is not inherently better than laying eggs, and in fact comes with several downsides, like being pregnant for a long time, which makes you a lot more likely to die from complications, and various things, but we'll talk about all the trade-offs toward the end. But the lineage that sort of led to all of our modern placental mammals and marsupial mammals was just the one that survived, and we happened to give live birth. That is my opinion on it, anyway.
Is that backed up by anybody important, or is this kind of you going off without
there have been papers written about it, and a lot of it is just kind of like thought experiments almost.
Right.
So, like, it's one of those things where it's like, I would be surprised in my lifetime if we get an answer to this. So.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, our synapsid ancestors, before there were mammals, were very, very diverse in the Permian and Triassic periods. They were living in diverse places, diverse lifestyles. And so the idea that some of them were giving live birth and others were laying eggs makes sense to me, that it was kind of a mishmash. Especially when we consider it in the context of all the various reptiles today that give live birth. So we'll talk about them now.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to get this out of the way early, no archosaurs are known to give live birth. So archosaurs are the group of reptiles that includes birds, crocodilians, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and probably turtles. Turtles are weird. They've kind of bounced around a lot, but these days they're leaning toward they're on this side of the reptile family tree. None of them, for example, none of the living archosaurs, so there are no birds, no crocodilians, and no turtles that give live birth today.
No birds, no crocodilians, and no turtles that give live birth. That tracks with what I would have guessed.
And so, because of that, it's not unreasonable to conclude that no dinosaurs or pterosaurs gave live birth, and that they all laid eggs. We have tons of dinosaur nests with eggs, so we know for sure that some did, obviously. But again, hard to prove a negative. But that's the general consensus, is that all dinosaurs and pterosaurs laid eggs. So, our obligatory mention of dinosaurs in a paleontology podcast. On to the rest of the reptiles. So, archosaurs, like I said, are one side of the reptile family tree. Lepidosaurs are the other. That is mostly lizards and snakes, but also some other extinct things like plesiosaurs, the ones that look like Loch Ness Monster. And probably ichthyosaurs are on this branch too. Lizards, including snakes, are widely believed by a lot of people to lay eggs. And that's mostly true. It's what we're taught in elementary school as one of the differences between reptiles and mammals. It's an easy thing to point out to kids. And generally, yes, most of them do. But there are a ton of lizards and snakes that give live birth. For example, the following give live birth. All members of the boa family, including things like anacondas, garter snakes and their relatives, like water snakes here in North America. Most, but not all, vipers give live birth. A handful of elapid snakes, which is the group that includes things like cobras and mambas. Some of them give live birth. Some, but not all, geckos. Some, but not all, chameleons. Some, but not all, anguid lizards, which includes a lot of like the legless lizards that aren't snakes. And some, but not all, skinks. Just to name a few.
Skinks? I haven't heard of skink in a while.
They're fun. They're a really cool group of lizards. And there are like individual members of, some of the other lizard groups that I didn't name, that maybe there's just like a species that gives live birth. But these ones, it's like prominent that like a good handful of all of those groups give live birth. And so within these groups, very closely related species might reproduce differently. With, one species even in the same genus laying eggs and another giving live birth. Even within the same species, some populations do it differently. If they're like the northern population of this, lizard species A, they might give live birth. If they're the southern population, they might lay eggs. There's even been a documented case of a skink laying a clutch of eggs, but holding on to one of them and giving live birth to a baby 3 weeks later. From one single clutch of eggs. And it's a species.
I mean,
this species of skink is like known to have like different populations within the same species that do it differently. But it was like this individual laid 3 eggs. Those eggs hatched, went on to be healthy babies, but also gave live birth a couple weeks after laying the eggs. And so obviously, this makes it really hard to figure out which method is the default for any given genus. Lizards and snakes are so fluid with how they, reproduce. It's incredibly difficult to figure out how many times live birth has evolved, because it can also evolve back into laying eggs as well. And so,
it's hard for me to even follow all this at this point, to be honest.
Well, because if you think about it, in some of the ones where it's like I mentioned, the like, hypothetical of like the frog who like holds on to the eggs, they hatch inside the mother, and then attach and form a placenta, that's like the extreme. Whereas some of these are like, I just don't lay the eggs. I hang on to them for as long as they would have taken to incubate anyway. They hatch inside me, and then I give birth to them. No real extra work by the mother required other than lugging them around.
Okay.
And so this is kind of why I say it's really hard to say with like a large level of confidence that those mammal ancestors, and even some early mammals, honestly, couldn't have been doing both depending on what group you're talking about, or even the environmental conditions at the time, like we see in some lizards. Again, this is a question that like I will be surprised if we get like a
Mm-hmm.
convincing answer in my
Right.
lifetime.
Right, of course.
But this is why I'm like, you really can't say one way or the other with any confidence. It probably was some kind of mishmash, and our common ancestor with marsupials just happened to give live birth. And so, yes, laying eggs is the default for lizards and snakes in general. There are definitely many more species that lay eggs than that give live birth. But for some particular genera, if half of the species lay eggs and half don't, and there are some related genera that give live birth, did live birth evolve separately all those times? Or was this group all giving live birth and egg laying re-evolved a couple of times? It's really, really hard to figure out.
Yeah.
This is why I like mammals. They make much more sense.
A little bit easier to follow.
And so that's mammals and reptiles. What about fish and amphibians? What are they doing? For amphibians, the list is not super long. There's one salamander species, a family of toads called the African live-bearing toads, very helpfully, and some caecilians, which, if you're not familiar with them, I don't blame you. They're like worm or snake-like amphibians that live in like the soil in like tropical regions. There are not that many of them. They don't get talked about a lot. We also don't know a lot about them because they live in places that are hard to study, and also they live underground. But they are a secret third group of amphibians. And that are truly viviparous. No enclosed egg develops, and the babies are fed through secretions in the womb, sort of like, more the mammal way to do it. No egg at all. There are some ovoviviparous ones as well, the ones that do have the egg inside, where the mother just doesn't lay the eggs. In some cases, they even like metamorphose inside the mother before they're born. So frogs famously, go from tadpoles, they grow legs and then turn into frogs. In some cases, they do all of that before they're born. So instead of giving birth to tadpoles, which some do, some others give birth to just small frogs. Yeah. So they hold on to them for a long time.
Small frogs. Okay.
For fish, the first group that comes to mind, and probably the most famous group of fish that give live birth, are the white sharks, such as the great white shark. In these sharks, they are ovoviviparous, so they have the egg inside. The mother feeds them mostly by releasing more eggs that are unfertilized for the babies to eat. There's also some evidence that they basically shed the walls of the uterus and the babies eat that as well. That's not something mammals can do because the placenta is attached to it. So if you shed the walls of the uterus, the baby dies. But in sharks, they can just like shed a bunch of their uterus, flesh, and the babies will eat that. Gross.
Uterus flesh. Okay.
Yep. In some other sharks, like the sand tiger shark, it's basically a competition between fertilized eggs. This species in particular has 2 separate chambers to the uterus, and in each, to start with, there's about 50 embryos. The embryos race to grow big enough to eat the others before they get eaten. And that's where they get most of their like early nutrients to start with. Eventually, it's, each chamber of the uterus has its champion. There's only one baby left in each, and the mother then continues to feed it by releasing eggs for them to eat, like a great white shark, until they're born. It's a little sibling on sibling cannibalism.
You don't say.
This also happens similarly in one species of salamander, and in a handful of species of bony fish, but the sharks are more famous for it. Among others, there's a short list of the ones that give live birth in some form. So, for example, sand sharks, like the sand tiger shark I just mentioned, mackerel sharks, which includes like the great white, nurse sharks, hammerhead sharks, coelacanths, which are famous for being one of the few lobe-finned fish still around today that are, like, all things considered, relatively closely related to tetrapods, land vertebrates. Some rockfish, guppies, the popular pet store fish, give live birth. Some of these fish provide, nutrition through eggs or siblings. Some have nutritious secretions in the uterus, like that kind of like uterus secreting like a milk-like substance almost. And some, like I said, have something even sort of similar to a placenta. That's not a uniquely mammal thing. And so this sort of lifestyle has evolved a bunch of times all over the vertebrate family tree. And then specifically, I want to take a moment to mention seahorses and pipefish that do a roundabout type of way of live birth. The female lays her eggs in a pouch that the male has, and the male is the one that carries them around until they hatch. In some species,
I feel like I've heard about the seahorse. Yeah, like I've heard like seahorses are where the males give birth, and people have made lots of jokes about that.
Yep. In some species, though, so he doesn't it depends on the species, but he doesn't just carry them around. Like there's like a patch inside his pouch where there's like blood vessels very close to the surface of the skin, that basically just leaks sugars and amino acids into the pouch. And, he controls the pH of the pouch to make sure the environment is as good as possible for the babies to grow. And then they hatch inside the pouch, and he releases them out into the world as, little miniature seahorses. So that's vertebrates. Very quick walk through invertebrates, because invertebrates scare me. Generally, invertebrates across the board, from jellies to insects to clams to sea stars, all mostly lay eggs, or in the case of most of the marine ones, don't so much lay eggs as much as throw their sperm and egg cells out into the water and let the ocean do the fertilizing for you.
As God intended.
As God intended. And, however, there are some that do give live birth. For example, some species of cockroaches, scorpions, and velvet worms, which are a weird group of... They look like wrong caterpillars. Almost. They're very strange. They basically have a placenta system, similar to that of mammals. And those are three wildly not very closely related groups of invertebrates. Some marine gastropods, so like snails and slugs, as well as some marine annelid worms. That's the same group that includes like earthworms and leeches. Do the embryonic cannibalism thing before being born live. Aphids, a very diverse group of insects, give live birth very often through parthenogenesis, where the babies are genetic clones of the mother. No mating involved, no male involved. These populations, and sometimes whole species, are entirely female.
I mean, there's several jokes they made there, but yes. I think I'm going to wait. I should probably wait for Fia to be here before I feel safe making...
Which, that's not an unheard of thing. There's a number of reptiles that do that too.
Sure.
There's also sort of factoring in here is called something called parasitoid insects, very often wasps, where they are sort of live-bearing. Parasitoid animals basically insert their eggs or larvae into hosts that the larvae eats its way out of, kind of like the aliens in the Alien movie franchise. And so in some species, the larva is hatched or like hatches in the process of being inserted into the host. In others, it's an egg that hatches very soon after being put into the host. So that's sort of live birth. These are just a few examples, But obviously, with invertebrates being the large majority of species on the planet, I could go on and on. Suffice to say, this is not just a vertebrate thing. It's definitely not just a mammal thing, giving live birth, and even having a placenta thing. It is not uncommon to see an invertebrate, particularly in groups that are, like, fairly mobile. So, like, the ones that, like, kind of just sit, like clams, no offense, Via. Like, they tend to have more complicated birth strategies. And even, in some cases, pretty sophisticated placentae. Still, definitely the minority by a long shot, but pretty much every group has some species that gives live birth. So, to sort of wrap it up here, why? Why give live birth? Let's talk about the downsides, because objectively there are several. Just ask anyone who has been pregnant. Firstly, you effectively have at least one, potentially several, parasites taking nutrients from you that could otherwise go to other things. Such as getting more food, outrunning predators, and even making more babies if you were able to do it more frequently. If you were doing the like clam strategy where you just throw your sperm and eggs out into the world and let it happen, or you were laying eggs, like chickens lay an egg every day.
Really?
I mean, I don't know if that's how they do it naturally, but like a farm chicken, yeah, they'll lay an egg every day.
Damn, that's kind of insane.
I'm sure it works differently when they're fertilized, but like if you don't have to carry it around with you, you can have babies more frequently because your reproductive tract is not occupied.
Huh. Okay.
There's also all of the potential health problems that come along with pregnancy. Humans are a bit more prone to these generally than other animals because of how we've kind of evolved to stand upright and what that did to our spines and pelvis and things. But other animals can still have lots of complications throughout pregnancy as well, like infections, bleeding. Say you have to run away from a predator and you do escape, but you had to run just a little too hard, or you took a hit or something to your side, that might not, make you give birth soon, and the baby could have like died and then could be just like rotting inside of you. That's like a nightmare fuel scenario. But
yeah,
that can happen, obviously, and that wouldn't happen if you're able to lay eggs. That's not to say that complications don't happen in egg-laying animals. So, like, for example, many lizards and snakes, and probably birds too, I'm sure, can become egg-bound, where the egg gets stuck inside of them, and that's depending on exactly where it is when it gets stuck. It can be more or less a death sentence for them. That happens every now and then with like certain pet reptile species. You have to go in and like have surgery on them to get it out, or they'll die. There's also the opportunity cost of how many more babies you could have in that same time period. So, like, for example, in the span of like the few weeks that like a small mammal like a mouse takes to give birth to a litter of like 6 to 8 babies, a similarly sized clam or something could hypothetically make thousands of babies. And so basically, laying eggs is also a way for the mother to take some of the energy burden of having babies off their plate to some degree. They still have to make all the yolk inside the eggs, which costs energy for sure, but they aren't tied to the baby. So if times get tough after the eggs are laid, that no longer negatively impacts the mother, like energetically, right?
Right.
So now for the upsides. Why would evolution push some species to give live birth? For starters, it does generally mean that your offspring have a higher chance of surviving.
And I'm assuming that's because, like, human babies notwithstanding, a lot of species that are born are ready to, like, at least have some kind of defense for themselves early on.
Yes.
As opposed to if you're in an egg and an elephant steps on top of you, like, you never saw the elephant coming. There was nothing you could do about it.
And so mammals and birds also are kind of the exceptions to this. But most other species, when they're born, they're kind of good to go. And there's a whole several lectures worth of like an ecology class. It's a topic called R versus K selected species. So basically, do you have a ton of babies to overwhelm any potential predators with like sheer numbers, knowing that if you have literally thousands of babies, they can't all get eaten? Or do you have fewer babies that are protected to some degree and therefore have a better chance of surviving? And so, if you think of like snakes, for example, when a snake hatches from an egg, it is more or less good to go. It might still have the yolk still kind of on it. That might give it, a day or two worth of food. But by, a couple days at least, after they're born, they are fully hunting, eating insects, eating fish, whatever they eat. And they are good to go. That's also the case when they're born from the mother, though. And again, the exception to that being mammals and birds. Mammals, because we all have milk that our babies eat. Even like the ones that are like as ready to go as possible for mammals, things like horses, where they're like up and walking and even like running with the herd like day one. They still can't like go out on their own because they can't eat grass yet, which is, what horses eat. They have to drink the milk from the mom. And again, for the things that lay eggs, the exception to that is birds for the most part, which again, basically do everything kind of weird, probably because they fly. Being pregnant for a long time and flying is not great. Bats make it work. And I hadn't thought about that until just the second, so I don't have any notes about it. But, yeah. So, for example, none of the sharks that give live birth, and very few of the bony fish or invertebrates that do much like parental protection post-birth. There are some that do. Like, I think there are some scorpions that watch over their babies for a little bit. But most will see their babies like as food or at the very least like competitors if they run into them again. So they don't really like stick around. This means that while you're only able to have a handful of babies, the ones you did have were able to bypass what's probably the most vulnerable part of their life as an egg. We've all seen the beginning of Finding Nemo. If the eggs were still inside Nemo's mom, there's a good chance they wouldn't have been eaten.
Certainly not all of them.
Right.
Or all but one.
And so if they skip the stage of being an egg out in the world, exposed, especially in the case of things like frogs or fish, like they can hide them, but like, they're still just out there. And that's not even like considering, like you said, that's not like predation, like you said, just an elephant walking through and stepping in the puddle where you laid your frog eggs. Literally nothing you can do about that. But if they're inside you, if you're a mama frog and you have all your eggs inside you, you can see the elephant coming and hop out of the way. This is for sure the biggest benefit, since we can tell that because in some of those lizard and snake species where in the same species, different populations might lay eggs or give live birth, the more high latitude or high altitude the species is, or that population, aka if you live in a place with seasons and variability in weather, the more likely you are to have live birth. So the more variability there is in your environment, the better it is to take your babies with you and protect them, mostly from things like cold or dryness. And then another thing that's a factor is it can actually be more energetically efficient in uncertain times. So like if you live in a place where it's always, 70 degrees, sunny, rains, a couple days a week, but not too much, good consistent like nature weather. If you lay eggs, all good. you can find a good place to hide them in like a tree or something. And, a hurricane's not going to come blow them away. You're not going to get a cold snap that's going to kill them. Stuff like that. But
Mhm.
if you live in a place or even like a time period where, stuff's changing a lot, if you lay eggs, you need to give them all the nutrients up front when you lay them. You can't give them more yolk later, right? And so you don't skimp on some eggs and give more yolk to the other. They basically give all of them full yolk with the expectation that any one of them could hatch, right? And so they need all of them to have the full development's worth of yolk, which takes a lot of energy for the mother. And
Mhm.
so if you lay your eggs and then suddenly there's a drought, those eggs might die, and then you also don't have a good way of getting that energy back.
Yeah, that sounds like a problem.
Yeah. And
Just from a
especially,
numbers point of view at
yeah,
that point.
and especially if this isn't a great example with like a drought, but if you like lay your eggs in an area and then leave it like sea turtles do, where sea turtles come up onto a beach, the only time in their lives that they come up onto the beach, lay their eggs, then go back out to the sea. If it's just like a weird weather patterns that season, and your food is just not around, you are kind of SOL. You just dumped a whole bunch of energy and you have no way at all of getting it back.
Mhm.
If you're carrying the baby with you, this is going to be a little morbid. You can basically spread the baby's energy needs out over time. And so, say, 30% of the way through the pregnancy, if times get tough, you can basically cut it off, and then you still have that 70% of energy that the baby would have gotten, but that you now need. And some species can even use it as sort of an energy storage that they can fully resorb up to a certain point in the pregnancy.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It
That's actually
varies
kind
a
of
lot from
awesome.
species to species. But, in, a lot of the ovoviviparous, the ones that lay eggs inside or, have eggs inside, that's easier to do than with, the way mammals do it. Mammals
Mhm.
can do that, but the time frame for it is like super early, where that becomes no longer an option. Or you also have the animals that don't have the niceties of human society. A lot of them, at certain times, they can sort of turn off their own pregnancy and make themselves give birth early to a stillborn baby, and then eat the baby.
Mhm. And then
Get
eat the baby.
the now dead baby, getting back all the energy that they spent building it.
Mhm.
Obviously, they don't want to do that. The goal, quote unquote, goal of evolution is to have babies and spread your genes on to the future. So they don't want to do that, but if it comes down to that or dying, they will continue living themselves, because then they can continue to go on and have babies in the future.
Hmm.
So it's, again, not
Yeah.
great to talk about in a human standpoint. We generally don't eat our stillborn babies.
Right, but think about it just from like a nature document. Like you get Attenborough out here talking about it, like all of a
Right,
sudden, it's kind of cool to think about.
right. You think like a lion wouldn't, if they had a stillborn baby, wouldn't eat that baby? That's a lot of nutrients that you just spent, and it'd
Mhm.
be cool if you could have them back, you know? So, there's a lot of animals that have like mechanisms for doing that.
Right.
And so, energetically, if you live in a time where it's like, I have really good food now, but 6 months from now, it might not be as consistent. If you have this pregnancy, you can spread out those energy needs over time. And if the pregnancy works out and you have your baby normally and healthily, great, perfect, evolution achieved. But if you don't, there is a way to, at the very least, minimize your energy losses from that. Does that make sense?
To minimize your energy, I mean, it sounds like you're almost hedging, like evolution. And again, evolution doesn't think, but like this was a way for evolution to sort of hedge as sort of the best middle ground between wanting to have as many babies as possible and also wanting to keep, the adults alive enough to be able to keep having more babies in case things didn't work out.
Exactly. And so
Perfect.
there are other ways to do that sort of thing. That's why, some, even though that they do lay eggs and don't give live birth, do protect their young. Like crocodilians are very famous for that. Likely dinosaurs did that a whole bunch as well, depending on which group of dinosaurs you're talking about. So it's like there still is an energy expenditure at that, because then you probably spend time maintaining your nest. You spend time and energy protecting the babies once they're born, stuff like that. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but concerning birth, these are kind of the gives and takes for why you would do one method over the other.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, that's the messiness of birth. And I thought that that'd be a fun episode to do. Now that I'm no longer on my paternity leave, my wife.
I was gonna.
But by the time
I know that you've done a couple episodes since then, but this is I can only imagine what has been on your mind.
Yeah, for example, my wife's maternity leave ends yesterday, the day you're listening to this, dear listeners. So yesterday was her first day back at work. And even though it has not happened for us yet, recording the podcast, I'm sure she's going to be quite sad. But we'll deal with that in the morning.
Yeah, give Liz my love. Give Liz all of our love here from I Wish You Were Dead.
And little baby Igneous.
Yeah? Baby Igneous, of course. This has been episode 166 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. We are back! And we'll see you guys again in a couple weeks. Until then, take care, everybody.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.